in the Constitution through the 26th Amendment. So beyond science, beyond policy, beyond activities, there is little doubt now that climate justice and climate insecurity could be the new fault line, or at the very least, or hopefully most, can be a new place of global convergence of the discourse as well. I only mention one or two small things to contextualize the discussion and then leave the floor to the keynote speaker. The critical role of legal and institutional mechanisms in shaping climate justice cannot be overstated. We will hear this today. At COP29, we supported the government in presenting Pakistan's climate actions, challenges, and policy solutions. And specifically, at the Pakistan Pavilion, where Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, Justice Aisha Malik, and Justice Jawad Hassan represented Pakistan, there was a special emphasis that was placed on the judiciary's role in addressing climate change. This is something that we will hear about more as well, including the compiled compendium of critical Pakistani judgments on climate change and a compilation of environmental laws. So at the UN system, please count on us not only to raise climate change as an environmental problem or a climate problem, but indeed as a justice problem, as a human rights issue as well. And maybe on this particular note, I am particularly honored to welcome Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, a long, steadfast advocate for climate justice and key in framing climate change and environment as a fundamental human right. So let me invite Justice Mansoor Ali Shah to the podium for his keynote address.
Distinguished guests, good morning and assalamu alaikum. I'm going to share what the judiciary's viewpoint is on climate justice and the trajectory over the years. The movement started way back in the 80s when we started off with environmental justice, moving on to climate justice. So take you through that journey and some of the ideas that the judiciary has today regarding climate justice. So let me start off by saying that climate justice is no longer a distant threat. This needs to be understood. It is a present and an accelerating crisis, particularly for countries in the global south. And my emphasis is going to be on global south today, which includes Pakistan, which contribute the least to the global emissions, but bear the brunt of its consequences. Pakistan is a frontline state of climate catastrophe and is ranked amongst the top 5 most vulnerable countries experiencing extreme weather events, glacial melt, water shortages, and devastating floods. I don't need to go into examples, but floods and disasters, if you look at that, in 2022, floods submerged 1/3 of the country, displacing over 33 million people, causing $30 billion in damages, and I'll come to the $30 billion later. Exposing the urgent need for climate adaptation and finance. Glacial melt and water crisis. Pakistan relies on the Hindu Kush Himalaya glaciers, which are melting at alarming rates. This threatens the Indus River system, the lifeline of Pakistan's agriculture, pushing the country towards severe water scarcity. Extreme heat waves and droughts, rising temperatures such as 50 degrees centigrade plus heat waves in Jacobabad are making some regions unlivable, increasing health risk and straining energy and water resources. Economic and social impact. Agriculture, employing almost 40% of the workforce, is suffering from erratic monsoons, leading to food insecurity, displacement, and economic instability. Just to give you a few examples and to define what is really happening right now. We must realize that global south faces a dual injustice. First, the disproportionate burden of climate impacts, and second, the structural barriers that limit their ability to respond effectively. The time for passive observations has passed, ladies and gentlemen. The time for passive observation has passed. We must rethink and rebuild our approach to climate justice. The architecture of climate justice in the global south must rest on firm and independent pillars. Let me give you my 9 pillars on how to structure climate justice. First, it requires a strong focus on adaptation and loss and damage, ensuring that vulnerable communities are not left to bear the burden of crisis they did not create. Mitigation is not our immediate issue. Second, a robust, active, and well-informed judiciary, and I hasten to add an independent one also, which is fast eroding here, a concept that is essential to enforce and actualize climate justice. Third, ensure that climate finance is readily available, including innovative mechanisms such as Islamic climate finance to support sustainable solutions. Plus, effective systems must be in place to access international climate funds, and I'll talk about that in a minute, cutting through bureaucratic hurdles to secure much-needed resources. Fourth pillar of climate justice, move towards nature finance, which is a growing area, and I'll just talk in a bit. Fifth, understand and learn climate science to guide our decision-making, ensuring that policies are evidence-based and future-proof. Sixth, climate diplomacy between countries of the global south must be strengthened, forging alliances to collectively demand fairer financial commitments and technological support. Seventh, we must take charge of our own future, investing in homegrown solutions tailored to our unique environmental and socio-economic realities, rather than waiting for external help. 8, climate accountability mechanisms must be established to prevent mismanagement and ensure that every dollar that flows in serves the communities and the ecosystems that need it most. And last, 9th, climate courts, dispute settlement, and a global court is much needed. And I'll come to that as we go on. So please remember, ladies and gentlemen, climate justice is not just an aspiration. It is a structure we must build with intention, urgency, and collective resolve led by our own hands. The future of our planet depends on climate justice, structure we build today. Here are some of my humble suggestions, and I'll share how we go about it. And this is all how we look at things sitting in the court and dealing with matters that come before us, and that's the thought process that's gone into all this that I'm saying and sharing with you today. So traditionally, courts in the global south have approached environmental justice by holding domestic polluters accountable through penalties and regulations. That's how it all started way back in the 80s. There was a polluter in the country, and we would pass sanctions, issue penalties, shut down a factory which was polluting. But we could identify a polluter that was there in the country. That was the time of environmental justice in this country, 80s and early 90s. We applied principles like polluter pays principle, public trust doctrine, intergenerational equity, precautionary principle, etc., and dealt with the issue. That was a whole body of environmental justice at the time. And then you enter climate change. With climate change, the primary polluter often lie beyond national borders, shifting the focus from the local enforcement to addressing adaptation and loss and damage. There is no polluter here, it's outside our jurisdiction. The whole paradigm shifts in climate justice. We need to look at multi-sectoral issues dealing with agriculture, irrigation, whatnot. So this transformation makes climate justice a multi-sectoral issue and a larger issue compared to judiciaries in the north. Judiciaries in the north are simply looking at mitigation, which is emission control. We're looking at a very broad canvas in Pakistan or global south. This transformation makes climate justice a multi-sectoral issue for the global south. The ambit of climate justice, which largely rests on adaptation, now includes water security, agriculture, food security, disaster risk reduction, health, urban planning, infrastructure, ecosystems and biodiversity, energy, finance, and capacity building. The scope totally changes. As a result, the scope of the climate justice for a judge in Global South is far broader than a judge in the Global North, where legal frameworks primarily regulate emissions. So jurisprudential trends. Let me just, before I go on to the more meaty areas that I want to talk about, just to give you a sense on what the courts have been doing and some of the trends that we developed. I'll not go into cases, but I'll talk about what trends came out in the last 20 years or so. So first of all, when we started dealing with climate cases, we came up with adaptive jurisprudence, and that's what we coin it as. Why adaptive jurisprudence? Because it deals with adaptation. It is not mitigational jurisprudence as we have it in the North. We have adaptive jurisprudence, which is unique to Global South, and especially Pakistan, where some of the judgments have had a global acceptance also. So number one trend is the adaptive jurisprudence, pushing government to adapt as opposed to mitigational jurisprudence. We came up with a model of setting up commissions to deal with this. All our cases dealing with climate change deal with setting up commissions. The courts can't really, deal with all these issues during the court hours. So we came up with setting up commissions. There's a climate change commission, a smoke commission, or Hobara Bustard commission. There are a number of commissions. That's the technique Pakistani courts have adopted. And those commissions have a unique feature. Because the court can't really spend that time in understanding how to go about it, I call it participatory justice. We invite the government, who becomes part of that commission. We have international experts come sit in that commission. It helps as a capacity building for the government as well, and they understand what solutions are best to take the agenda forward. And it is more or less inquisitorial jurisdiction rather than adversarial jurisdiction, that says. So commissions have been rather unique in our climate justice jurisprudence, and that's how we've approached these matters. Let me just share with you that the first case that came was Asghar Laghari case when I was at the High Court. It just landed in my court. And a farmer simply said, sir, this climate change is coming, and it's going to bring droughts here, and I'm going to lose out on my agriculture. And there is a climate change policy that the federal government has, which is lying on the shelf. Nothing has been done about it. Please push the government to do something about it. So we issued a mandamus, and I still remember that the government that came at that time when we set up that commission had no clue what climate change was all about. They had just heard about global warming, and they said, well, climate change 101, but that's about it. They had no sense and idea on how to sort of deal with the issue. So we set up a climate change commission with IUCN and WWF and others sitting there to capacity build the government as to how to go about it. And by the time I left the High Court, 60% of those short-term policy matters were actually actualized and looked after. Because of that commission, the government understood how to deal with this because the experts were sitting next to them. So in a very participatory kind of a process, we dealt with that. The third ingredient that comes out of our jurisprudence is human dignity. The whole thing rests on human dignity. The entire jurisprudence is anchored in human dignity. At the core of human dignity is the autonomy of the individual will, recognizing man to be a free agent, possessing freedom of choice. Dignity is universal and intrinsic to a human being. Climate change affects all aspects, essential aspects of person's life, raising issues of water security, food security, health security, and energy security. With all these insecurities, a person's ability to design his own life, his plan is weakened, and his ability to make choices becomes difficult. Climate change can diminish individual and collective quality of life, and with it, human dignity. And that's how we look at it. And that's why the court interfered on this fundamental right, which is non-negotiable under our Constitution. One of the strongest fundamental rights that our Constitution has is right to human dignity. We went further. We said we need to now talk about dignity of nature. Let's get rid of this human aspect and let's move on. And we talked about dignity of nature because human dignity is therefore incomplete if it does not factor in dignity of nature. In upholding the dignity of nature, do we actually uphold human dignity? So that's the step forward that we went. We also changed the approach on deciding matters. We went into biocentric approach in attending to issues. We said there has been a recent rise of jurisprudential thought which rejects the false dogma of humans over nature, and instead recognize our interconnectedness with natural world and acknowledge its rights to exist, persist, and maintain its vital cycles. The transition from an anthropocentric approach denoted by the right to the environment to a biocentric approach constructed around rights to nature. That's been a paradigm shift in our approach on the judicial side. So we also gave nature a legal personhood. Granting nature a legal personhood is a transformative step in environmental protection, recognizing ecosystems as rights-bearing entities rather than mere property. This legal status allows rivers, forests, and other natural entities to have a standing in court, enabling legal action against environmental harm. The key advantage is that it shifts the focus from human-centered exploitation to ecological preservation, ensuring that environmental interests are directly represented. So countries like Ecuador, New Zealand, and Bangladesh have already implemented this approach, leading to stronger conservation efforts and accountability. We've also introduced, and that's now very close to my heart also, Islamic environmentalism. In one of our recent decisions, we've gone back to the Holy Book, the Quran, and looked at that how, 90% of it really talks about environmental issues. And that wisdom we brought into the courtroom. And if you see the recent judgment, it talks about, for example, I'll refer to it, the concept of Tawheed, unity of God. The Quranic concept of Tawheed underscores the idea that all things come from one creator. This perspective encourages holistic approach to the environment, viewing the earth and all its inhabitants as interconnected and interdependent. Stewardship, Khalifa. The Holy Quran emphasizes that humans are stewards, Khalifas on the earth. This concept promotes responsible management of the earth resources. And we also thought that we might connect with people. We've been coming up with environmental jurisprudence for years. But now with religion coming into it, so it's culturally so deepened, we could understand that we could relate to people when we were talking about these things. Talk about balance, mizan. The Holy Quran speaks about balance in creation and warns against upsetting this balance. Climate change, which is driven by human activities, is disrupting the earth's natural balance. Avoiding waste, says the Quran, israf. Islam discourages wastefulness. The current pattern of consumptions and the waste, especially in more developed countries, are contributing significantly to the greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And finally, justice, adl. Climate change is also a matter of justice, as it disproportionately affects the poor and vulnerable people who often have contributed least to the problem. So this jurisprudence was brought into it also. The judiciary's role is no longer just about punishment, as it was under environmental justice. Under climate justice, it is about ensuring survival, resilience, and fairness in the face of crisis caused everywhere. As a result, in Pakistan, the courts have held that government accountable for its inaction on climate change, emphasizing the need for comprehensive adaptation measures across various sectors. Courts in Pakistan have shaped adaptive climate jurisprudence, which is globally recognized now, issuing directives to government institutions to take concrete steps toward climate adaptation across various sectors. Our judgments were guided by the urgent need to protect vulnerable communities, ecosystems from the growing impacts of climate change. Now things change here. We've been giving directions for the last maybe 10 years now, thinking that our directions are being actualized and things are changing. But then the floods hit us in 22 and we realized that nothing much has happened on the ground. So this is a wake-up call for the judiciary where we turn course. So however, through the course of implementation, we have come to realize a stark reality, and this is the change that has been brought in. While government or public sector institutions may agree to act, they often lack the financial resources to do it effectively. Nobody from the government would come and say, we can't do it, sir, because you don't have the money. They will say, yes, sir, we'll do it. And we think, oh, we've just today conquered the world. We've passed this decision and everything is going to change on the ground. Now we've realized, no, it's not happening. There's a gap. Nothing is happening on the ground while we keep up with all these judgments and jurisprudence that we keep creating. So this gap between judicial mandates and financial capacity of the government has brought us to the critical realization, and that's where we stand today, a critical realization that climate finance is just not an economic issue. It lies at the very heart of climate justice. So climate justice to us today, that's how judiciary would feel, is climate finance. Without adequate funding, adaptation remains an aspiration rather than a reality, and the most vulnerable continue to bear the brunt of climate disaster. We soon realized this after the devastating floods of 2022, that the only way forward is through climate finance. Climate finance in the global south is perhaps the most critical and important component of climate justice. This is where we stand today. And just 2 days ago, the Supreme Court came up with a decision, an order, where they said that climate finance is now the new fundamental right. It's as important as anything else if you want to look after right to life and right to dignity. Climate finance is just not an economic necessity. It is our lifeline. It determines our ability to strengthen critical sectors such as infrastructure, agriculture, water management, health, and disaster resilience. It shapes how we address displacement and migration, mitigate economic inequality, and protect our most vulnerable communities from climate-induced devastation. Climate finance is required for all this. Delay in financing is not just a policy failure, it is a denial of justice. For countries in the global south, where adaptation to climate change is an urgent reality, climate finance is fundamentally a human rights issue. I'm sorry, I won't have this. I need more time. Thank you. I haven't even yet started. Actually, I'm not used to it also because they don't tell judges to just be quiet. You see, I'm sorry, I'm just on a lighter side. But I have a few things to say, and if I have time. Thank you. So the ability to adapt, recover, and rebuild in the face of climate disasters is not a privilege. It is essential to preserving human dignity and survival. The right to life and the right to dignity enshrined in our constitutions and international human rights frameworks must now be understood to include the right to climate finance. Without it, our people are left defenseless against a crisis they did not create. Climate justice demands that countries with resources, global north, support countries on the front lines of climate change, global south, not as charity, but as a legal and moral obligation. If climate finance continues to fall short, the gap between developed and developing nations may grow, leading to what some people term it as climate apartheid, where wealthy nations protect themselves from climate impacts, while poorer countries are left to bear the brunt. So what do we do with climate finance? And let me take you into that now. So we understand that the North has a moral, legal, and a financial obligation to fund and to pay for all what has happened to us in the global South. The principle of common but differentiated responsibilities within the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change holds that developed countries should lead in providing climate finance. Without honoring their commitment, the global North risks furthering inequality, where countries least responsible for emissions face the heaviest burdens. So we said, okay, that's good. I mean, if there's a problem, we'll go up to the North and ask them what to do. And there are a number of key global funds, and I'll just mention those. So the key global funds for climate finance are the Green Climate Fund, GCF, the Global Environmental Facility, GEF, the Adaptation Fund, AF, the Climate Investment Fund, CIFs, Least Developed Countries Fund, LDCF, Special Climate Change Fund, SCCF, International Climate Finance by donor countries, bilateral agreements. Very fancy. They're all there. Is the money really coming to us? Has it come to us? $30 billion we heard In 2022, we were stuck with these floods and hit by those floods, and the total bill of loss and damage then was $30 billion. Where's the money? And we have all these financial organizations that talk about these funds. So challenges with global climate. And as a judge, I've been trying to understand, how do we access these funds? What's the process? Where are the rules? What's the mechanism? How do I apply? So what we understand is that it's a cumbersome process and there's bureaucracy. Developing countries face significant challenges in preparing proposals, obtaining approvals, and meeting compliance requirements for funds like the GCF. Funds often have lengthy timelines and stringent eligibility criteria, slowing down the process. Then there is inadequate and unequal distribution. Global funds have been criticized for insufficient disbursement, particularly for adaptation projects in developing countries. Funding commitments made by developed nations often fall short, leaving adaptation projects underfunded. Dependence on donor priorities. Global funds are influenced by donor countries' priorities, which may not align with the local adaptation needs of the global south. Lack of predictability and scalability. Funding through global funds is often unpredictable and inconsistent. So these are the problems that we're facing. So despite international agreements and numerous COPs, there'll be COP30 coming up. So 30 years we spent now talking about climate change. It's going to be 30 years next year. What have we achieved? Countries of the global south continue to face significant challenges in accessing global green funds. This disparity underscores the need for climate justice to encompass reparative measures. Hence, climate justice is increasingly shaping into reparative justice. That's yet another term that has come. Identifying international climate finance to be nothing else but a climate debt that they owe it to us and they must pay. So the climate, I don't want to go into the reality, because in the 30 billion figure that was quoted earlier, and I think everybody quotes that, we've heard that $3 billion have been approved. I am not sure if it has come. I can't go onto a website and find out for the floods in Pakistan 22, how much money has trickled down, what has actually gone down to that village, how much money has gone down there, I don't know. With all the power and access that I have to information sitting in the Supreme Court, I cannot lay my fingers on it. I don't know, where is the fund? Where is that $3 billion? Where has it gone? Has it reached that poor chap who was, thrown out of his house? I don't know. So this is the reality. So what do we do now? So the crucial lesson, had the global north succeeded in mitigation, the need for adaptation would not have arisen. I mean, it's very clear. Had they been successful in mitigating, adaptation would not have arisen. And if adaptation had been effective, there would have been no loss and damage. This successive failure teaches us a crucial lesson. We cannot wait for external solutions. The global south must take charge of its own climate future, developing localized adaptation strategies, securing climate finance on its own terms, and ensuring that justice, not dependency, shapes our response to this crisis. So let's look inwards. What can we do sitting at home now? Because nothing is coming from outside, and climate finance is key to all this climate justice issue. So what do? We look at our Climate Change Act 2017, and we see that there is a provision in the Climate Change Act 2017 that you must have a climate change authority in the country, and you must have climate change fund. Coincidentally, the case came up before us through a public interest litigation where somebody, citizens came up to the court and said, sir, this law has come out in 2017 and there is no climate change authority, it's 2024. And there is no climate change fund. The most serious existential threat Pakistan faces is climate change, yet we do not have a climate change authority, yet we do not have a climate change fund. Law came out in 2017. So we reached out to the government, we called them, they've been working on it perhaps, and the last information that I have, the authority is yet not been constituted, and there is not a penny in the climate change fund account. So that's how sad it is. The court asked at that time, in the recent budget, have you allocated any money for the climate change fund? They said no. Maybe they've done it now, but I'm just telling you what happened earlier. So no such authority and no such fund. Okay, fine. So that's what's happening locally. But then let's look at Islamic financing. Becomes very important now, to my mind, to deal with these crises. Sukuk is a bond, is one of the best instruments for climate finance in the global south due to its inherent principles which align closely with the objectives of environmental protection and social justice. Here are the reasons why Sukuk is particularly well suited for addressing climate finance challenges in the global south. Number one, it's faith aligned and based on ethical principles, rooted in principles of social justice, equity, and sustainability. Then it's an asset-backed and project-specific. I'm no banker. We have the finance minister just walk in. So he would know a lot more about it. But as a judge, we think that the only solution to this problem could be through Islamic financing and maybe through Sukuk bonds. So it also carries flexibility and local ownership. It carries efficiency and timely disbursements. It has innovative financial structures. Sukuk can be tailored to match specific climate adaptation projects. Examples are Green Sukuk, which targets sustainable development goals and environmental projects, lower reliance on external approvals, and then financial inclusion is also a part of it. So our stress now has been that, yes, Islamic climate finance is a great way forward. And we look around in the region and we see that Green Sukuk in Malaysia, which is a pioneer in Green Sukuk issuance, has come up with a 58 million finance as a large-scale solar project through Sukuks. It demonstrates the use of Sukuk for renewable energy projects that help mitigate climate change. Indonesia's Green Sukuk has issued multiple Green Sukuk to finance renewable energy, sustainable transportation, waste management, and adaptation projects. Similarly, there have been efforts in the Middle East, in the UAE, as well as in Saudi Arabia. I don't need to go into the details. The Islamic Development Bank has also come up with Green Sukuk. So these examples are there around us that we could look at. We could also then move forward and look at other sources of Islamic finance. For example, the Waqf, which is an endowment, a perpetual charitable endowment where assets or funds are set aside for public benefits such as education, healthcare, or environmental conservation. For example, the Cash Waqf for Climate Change Fund, initiated by the Islamic Development Bank, supports sustainable development projects in member countries. In Indonesia, Waqf funds have been used to finance small solar projects or solar energy projects for rural communities. So there's a huge size of Waqf. I mean, we look at that when cases come to us in the court. We understand that there's a huge energy there available in the Waqf that is there in the country, needs to be channelized. Zakat, which is charity, a mandatory charitable contribution for Muslims, typically 2.5% of the annual savings, which can be directed towards alleviating poverty and supporting social causes. An example could be zakat has been used to provide clean water and renewable energy in sub-Saharan Africa, as seen in the projects of organizations like UNHCR, Zakat Fund. Then we have Takafful, which is Islamic insurance, and that also could be tapped into. Not my area, but this is what's happening around us, and we have just identified that we can't do anything because global funding isn't really coming to us. And lastly, as far as finance is concerned, I'll refer to Istisna, which is manufacturing or construction finance. That could be also looked into, and there are examples in Saudi Arabia regarding this. And I move on. Having said that, I just want to go to the next pillar that I wanted to talk about, and that is nature finance. Now, that's a growing area. And I think the country and our financial institutions need to start thinking about nature finance. This is different from Islamic climate finance. This is nature finance, and this is driven towards looking at nature and rehabilitating things. So nature finance is an emerging concept that focuses on financing projects and initiatives aimed at conserving and restoring natural ecosystems, promoting biodiversity, and tackling environmental challenges like deforestation and land degradation. So what are the key goals of nature finance? Support biodiversity conservation, promote sustainable land and marine use, enhance climate resilience by protecting ecosystems like mangroves and wetlands, develop nature-based solutions to climate challenges like afforestation or reforestation. So nature finance has unique tools and approaches that make it distinct. For example, carbon markets, companies or governments pay for carbon credits to offset emissions with funds going towards protecting forests, wetlands, or oceans that absorb carbon. Number two, debt for nature swaps. Countries with high debt burdens agree to conserve ecosystems in exchange for debt relief, often facilitated by international organizations. We have payments for ecosystem services, PES. Governments or private entities pay landowners or communities for preserving natural ecosystems that provide vital services, for example, clean water, flood prevention. Nature-based bonds tied specifically to achieving measurable nature-related outcomes such as reforesting degraded land or protecting coral reefs. Biodiversity credits, financial instruments tied to measurable biodiversity outcomes such as increasing the population of endangered species. So we could look at nature finance, we could look at Islamic financing after having said that we're not getting anything from the global funding on climate. The next important pillar in the entire architecture of climate finance, climate justice is climate science. So climate science is critical for obtaining climate finance for loss and damage or adaptation projects because it provides the evidence base necessary to justify financial claims, design effective interventions, and meet donor requirements. So if we do not know anything about causation and attribution, scientific data helps demonstrate how specific climate-related disasters such as floods, droughts, and rising sea levels are linked to global warming. So attribution science is particularly important in loss and damage claims. I have no idea if we have that capacity in the country or not, needs to be developed. We cannot talk about climate finance without having a good handle on climate science. Then it helps quantify loss and damage. I don't know how the 30 billion figure came out. There must have been some science behind it. So climate models and risk assessments provide estimates of economic and non-economic losses suffered by vulnerable countries. These include infrastructure destruction, livelihood losses, displacement, and ecosystem degradation. Without precise data, it is difficult to argue for adequate compensation from climate finance mechanisms. So if somebody is affected or somebody's land is affected through drought or floods, how do we set up a feasibility report? How do we set up a claim, you see, unless we have an understanding of climate science? And I don't know. I maybe excuse my ignorance, but there must be some climate science available in the country which deals with these areas. Moving on, considering that perhaps time is short, and I'll just refer to one last thing, two things. One is climate diplomacy. I think it's high time that V20, we need to get onto that platform of V20 and do something about it. So climate democracy is a crucial pillar, needs to be gone into, and I've had a word with the team that of V20 that was visiting, the CVF also, and I told them that it's high time that judiciaries of these countries ought to also talk to each other if they want to develop climate justice area. And lastly, my submission is that we need to get into homegrown solutions. It's about time that we look at how we're going to do things on our own and not really rely on external help and support, which isn't really coming our way. So homegrown solutions, in a recent case where land was acquired 30 years ago to set up a water treatment plant, and we're just waiting for international donors to pay us 80 billion rupees to set up a water treatment plant. And we've recently held that, please, there are homegrown solutions, because these water treatment plants are at the very edges of River Ravi, and contaminated water is flowing into River Ravi. But it means that for the last 30 years it's been flowing in because we're just waiting for funding. So I think we could have talked about local solutions to that issue and should have dealt with that at that time. So I'll just close by referring to by saying that the fight against climate change is not just about survival. It is about reclaiming our agency and shaping a resilient future on our own terms. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Shah. Thank you, Mr. Risk. Thank you for your time and for your insights. Our next session is due to commence shortly. Titled Pakistan's Critical Need for Climate Finance, a 70-minute session is due to commence now. It will focus on Pakistan's critical need for climate finance. The chairman of the session is the Federal Minister for Finance and Revenue for the Government of Pakistan, Mr. Mohammad Aurangzeb. The keynote address will be delivered by development and financial expert Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, followed by the Governor of State Bank, the former Governor of State Bank, Mr. Salim Raza, with the concluding address from the Global Director of Climate Change for the World Bank, Ms. Valerie Hickey. I'd request the speakers to take to the stage. I'd like to request this.
break के बाद.
Starting from just ₹51, download the Yango app and book your ride now.
Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause to the master of every ring, the unbeatable, flavorful, and irresistible Sabroso Spicy Chicken Donut, जिसकी हर बाइट में है स्पाइस का ऐसा यूनिक बैलेंस जो कर दे सबको नॉकआउट. इसी को तो कहते हैं द स्पेशलिस्ट मूव. गिव इट अप for the all-new Sabroso Spicy Chicken Donut, King of the Ring.
I am Sidra Iqbal and you're watching Dove Presents Real Beauty series.
Beauty comes in so many different ways.
Somebody looked at you and told you that you're beautiful.
That's a powerful question. If someone is better than me, please, you go do this, I'll follow your lead. My body is strong. I am strong. My mind is strong.
Peak Frames Original Sandwich. Originals are forever.
अम्मी, क्या लड़कियां पायलट नहीं बनती?
ये देखो तुम्हारे बाल, ये जैसे चाहे बन सकते हैं क्योंकि ये मजबूत हैं. तुम भी जो चाहो बन सकती हो क्योंकि तुम भी मजबूत हो. एक माँ ही बनाती है बेटी को जड़ से मजबूत. जैसे लाइफ बॉय शैम्पू का नया एलोवेरा और मिल्क प्रोटीन फॉर्मूला बाल बनाए मजबूत. लाइफ बॉय शैम्पू, तुम मजबूत हो.
नए सर्फ एक्सेल की स्टेन लिफ्टर टेक्नोलॉजी खींच निकाले सालन से लेकर कीचड़ तक हर तरह के जिद्दी दाग. तो दागों से क्या डरना, सर्फ एक्सेल है ना.
नन्हा सा जहन, बड़ा कुछ है सीखना. नन्ही सी जान, बड़ी सी शरारत. ये अपनी